Daf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph will begin Daf Yud Amud Beis, the second line from the bottom. We explained in the Mishnah that according to Rabbi Yehuda, you don't do the Bedika after the Zman of the Isser, because we're afraid that if he does a Bedika, he might find some Chametz and he might come to eat it. He might forget and impulsively come to eat the Chametz. Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says, we do not allow him to do the Bedika after the Zman HaYisser. Do we find that Rabbi Yehuda is geyser that you might come to eat food which is also things which are also Tanan? We learned in a different context. Once they were makriv the korban haimer, yotzim or moitzim shuki Yerushalayim shem leim kemach ve'kali. People would go out and they would find that day that the markets of Yerushalayim were filled with flour and grain that were dried in the oven from the new crops. Now, the Chodesh, the new crops, is also Chodesh is also Minatayra, and it's only after the Makra of the Aimer that it becomes a mutter. So now, if the markets of Yerushalayim were filled with the new grain, the flour, and the parched grain, the oven-dried grain, that must be that they were handling it even before they were Makra of the Aimer. They must have been dealing with it, handling with it, transporting it to the Shuk Yerushalayim, because on the very day that they were Makra of the Aimer, it was already filled with the Chodesh. So you see that the markets were filled with the new grain. Now that was done Shaloi B'Ratzon Chacham. That was Shaloi B'Ratzon Divrei Ramer. Ramer says that the Chachamim, it was against their wishes. But Rabbi Yehuda Aimer B'Tzayin Chachamim Hayu Eisim. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it was with the consent of the Chachamim. So you see that they permitted them to handle the new grain, and they weren't geyser that and he's not geyser that, well, in the course of handling it, and the people might come to eat it. So you see, he's not geyser. More answers. Now he said the only reason that it was mutter is because there was a shinui. They were only matir, the harvesting of the grain, by plucking it. So he'll remember the yisser, and therefore that will remind him not to eat it. So therefore over there it was mutter. But over here by chametz, if he does the bedika, he might come to eat the yisser. Abai says, well, there's a zecher, there's a shinoi, there's something to remind him. That's at the time of the plucking. But what are you going to say during the other stages of processing, the grinding and the sifting? What are you going to say over there? There was no shinoi over there, and it was still mutter. The more answers no. Halakasha, there was a shinoi. It was done with a hand mill as opposed to a larger water mill. And arakara al gabe napa. It was not done with the regular sieve. It was done with the back of the sieve. It was turned upside down. So there was a shinoi. So that would remind him not to eat. We learned in the Mishnah, you are allowed to harvest from the Beis HaShalachim, the irrigated fields, are the fields that are in the valleys, and you're allowed to do it in the normal way, in the usual way, even before the makr of the Aimer Avaloi Gach, but you're not allowed to pile it up. You're not allowed to stack them and pile them up. Vaikim, Rabbi Yehuda. And we said sign that who is the Tana, who is the author of that? It's Rabbi Yehuda. What are you going to say? It's mutter to do the harvesting over there, even in the normal manner. So there's no shina, and we're not geyser that he might come to eat it. Now the context of this halacha is, the background is, that it's not only also to eat from the new produce before the makra the aimer, but the ktsira, the harvesting, the first harvesting that you do has to be also for the aimer, for the purposes of the minchas aimer. But where do we say that? We say that that's only from fields where they're going to bring the produce for the aimer. But fields that are not going to be used, that they're not going to bring the aimer from those fields, then there's no Isser of Ksira. The Pasuk says, Ki tzavoy la'aretz asher noisen lachem ksartem es Ksira, v'avesam zaymer reishes Ksirachem elakayin. It says, you harvest, and uksartem es Ksira v'avesam. So it's mashma that you can do Ksira before bringing the Ayr. And then it says, as Aymer reishes Ksirachem elakayin, that the reishes Ksirachem, the first harvesting has to be elakayin for the Aymer. So Chazal Darshan, that is both ways. If it's from a field that is the grain would be brought for the Aymer, you can't harvest, not only cannot eat from that produce, there's an issue of eating the Chodesh, you can't even harvest from that grain before the Aymer is brought. You can't harvest it unless it's for the purpose of the Aymer. But if it's from a field that is the grain is not going to be used for the Aymer, you're allowed to harvest it. Now, these fields that we're talking about over here, the Beis HaShlachim, Shabbat Mokim, are inferior fields. The grain was not brought for the Aymer from those fields. Therefore, you're allowed to harvest in the normal way. But you can't stack it up. You can't pile it up. And we said that's according to Rav Yehuda. And so you see that even though there's no shinoi by the ksira, we're not geyser that you might come to eat from it. So it's a kasha. Why over there are we not geyser? Taisus asks. It says well, why are you not allowed to stack it up? Why aren't you allowed to pile it up? So Taisus said they only made this heter. Normally they would have been geyser, but they only made the heter for Katsira because if they didn't, there would be a hefsed gadol. Because if you leave the standing grain of the field at the time when it's ripe and it should be harvested, it'll spoil. So even though minat Torah is mutter to harvest it, the Chachamim would have made an Isser d'Rabbanan, not to confuse it with other fields, but because of the hefsed, they permitted it. But for the Goytshim to stack it up, there's no hefsed if they don't pile it up, so they were not matter. We have a kasha. Well, if they did not allow you to do the other processing, they only allowed you to do the ksira on account of the hefsed. Well, we just learned that the shekar v'aymer they did the whole processing, and the shuk of Yerushalayim were filled with the grains and the flour. Taisus said that was only mutter lo'ele regalim. That was brought to Yerushalayim so that the oil regalim, people of oil regel, should have the flour, the food they were able to have to make the bread and the matzahs, etc. They were matter for oil regalim specifically for that purpose, but otherwise they were geyser on the other processing, but not for the ktsira because there would have been a hefsed merubah. But Al Kolpanim, what do you see over here? You see over here that Rabbi Yehuda is not geyser by the ksir of the Beis HaShlachim. Elo Amar Abaye Chadash B'dil Minei Chametz Lo Yabadol Minei. He says there's an overriding principle over here. Yes, the Chachamim would be geyser, and Rabbi Yehuda says that they would be geyser Dilo Asel Mecham. But where are they geyser that a person might come to eat it? They come to their geyser in a place where a person is not accustomed to restraining himself from eating. Meaning, by chametz, a person the whole year eats chametz. So if he does bedikas chametz after the Shasi Yisur, he might impulsively now put some chametz in his mouth. The whole year he's not accustomed to abstain from eating chametz. There's no restriction from it. So it's dafka now, the whole year's mutter comes Yudalid, Nisan, Lachar Zmani Yisur. If a person does the bediki, he might impulsively put the chametz into his mouth. But the chadash, bottle minei, chadash person knows not to eat the chadash. He doesn't eat the chadash the whole year. And the way Rabbeinu Chanal explains it, well, there isn't chadash the whole year, so what does it mean he's bottle minei? Meaning that he's not accustomed to eating chadash. And when there is chadash, he knows to keep away from the new crops. From that new crops, he knows to keep away from it until the mark of the Eimer. So it's not something that he's accustomed to eating on a regular basis that we would have to be geyser. Rava has a question. The Rabbi Yehuda kasha. You seem to be only bothered by the stira and the apparent stira in Rabbi Yehuda. The Rabbana like kasha. It's not a kasha to you, an apparent stira in the Rabbanan. It seems to be also a stira in the Rabbanan. It said that in the case of when they were makriv the Omer, it says that they found the Shuk Yerushalayim that was filled with chemical kolik, and according to Rav Meir, it shaloi b'rotzon chachamim. As Rashi explains, Rav Meir is normally the bar plukta of Rabbi Yehuda. So in our Mishnah, when it said that the Rabbanan said you do bedika even after Shasi Yisur, presumably that's Rabbi Meir. Now, Rav Meir, therefore, in our Mishnah says you do bedikas chomas after the Shasi Yisur, and the is not geyser that you might come to eat it. Yet, by the case of Chodesh, he says it shaloi b'rtzon chachamim, presumably because he will come to eat the Chodesh. So the more answers, the Rabbi Yehuda like Kashik, and Shanina, like we just answered. The Rabbana Nami like Kasha, it's also not a Kasha. Why? Because who hasam achazra level sarfa meichal ka'achamine. He himself, his whole purpose is to burn the chametz. Are we concerned that he's going to eat it? Meaning, generally speaking, the Rabbanan would be concerned, and therefore by Chadash, it's shalai b'rotzon chachamim, because the But in our case, in the Mishnah, by Chometz, they're not concerned because in our case, the purpose of doing the Bedikas Chometz is to find the Chometz to destroy it. So in this case, they're not concerned to because the motive is to destroy the Chometz. So specifically in this case, we're not concerned that meaning, it comes out, and as we'll see as we go further, that this application is in more cases as well. In general terms, everybody agrees Dilma Asal Mechame. We are concerned he might eat it. If he handles a Dover Yisr, he might come to eat it. However, there is a different factor to consider in that in Chametz, the Chachamim say if he's doing a Bedikas Chametz, his motive is to destroy it. Here we're not concerned that he's going to come to eat it. According to Rabbi Yehuda, there's a different factor that has to be taken into account, and that is that whether he's Bodel Minei or not Bodel Minei. If something that he's accustomed to keeping or restraining himself from doing, so we're not concerned. Something where he is not accustomed, we are concerned. Ravashi gives another possible answer. Ravashi Amar, the Yehuda Ravi like Kasha. It's not a Kasha, the Sir of Yehuda, Kemach v'Kolitan. It says that they found the Shuk Yerushalayim with Kemach v'Koli. So therefore, we say on this, they're not over here, there's no concern, because over here, it's something which is not eaten. Normally you don't eat it, it's not eaten when it's raw. The case over there by Chometz, in our case in the Mishnah of Chometz, there's a concern because it's talking about a piece of bread, it's Chometz, so he might pop it into his mouth. Where is he not concerned? He's not concerned in the case by Chodesh because it's Kemach v'Koli. People don't eat flour, so they were not concerned that it'll come to put the flour or the toasted grain in his mouth. When the Gemara says, Rashi Badusi, that's not correct. Well, that's fine. You can say when the grain reaches that stage where it's flour or it's dried in the oven. But till it got to that stage where it's flour or koli, well, it was not there from the beginning when they harvested and he processed it. It wasn't flour yet. It wasn't oven dried yet. And in the earlier stages, it is edible. And yet he wasn't geyser. Maybe he'll say, no, but there's a heker because it was done not through harvesting, only through kituf, through plucking, so there was a shinuim. Well, we said about the case by Kaitzim Beis HaShlokim Shamakim, in those areas you can harvest in the normal manner. And we said that's going according to Rabbi Yehuda, Ma'ikel Meimar. There's no shini over there, there's no heker over there, and it's edible, and yet he's not geyser that you might come to eat it. Therefore, we reject it, it's not correct. Rabbi Yehuda. Is it so that Rabbi Yehuda says when a person is not accustomed to restraining himself from an item, that we are goizer dimo asur l'meichal minei? Meaning, like we suggesting that in Chometz, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says you don't do the bedika is because if it's after Zman Yisr, a person might come impulsively to eat the Chometz. He's not accustomed to restraining himself from Chometz, so he's goizer. By Chodesh, he's not goizer. We learned in the Mishnah in Shabbos, a person should not put a hole in an eggshell, and fill it with oil, and put it along a nair, a lamp, so that it should drip into the nair. And even if it is out of cheres, out of earth, and wherever Yehuda mater, and Yehuda says it's mutter. So the case is as follows. So you have a nair, you have a lamp, so it has a flame, it has oil, and it's burning. Now, if you want to keep the flame burning, you want to feed it with fuel. So one eitzah that they had in those days was they took an eggshell, and of course it was hollow. They filled it with oil. They made a hole, and a small hole, so that the oil would drip, and it would drip into the lamp, and it would feed it with oil, so it would be a reservoir. And therefore, it would continue to drip through the day or through the night, and it would be a source of light for them for a long period of time. On Shabbos, there's a problem with this. Why is that? Because a person might say, oh, well, he doesn't need the light anymore, he doesn't need the warmth anymore, whatever the case may be, and therefore he might come to take away some of the oil from the reservoir. Now on Shabbos, if he removes the source of the light, if he removes that fuel, that's considered to be mechaber. That's extinguishing. Filling it with oil is considered to be mavir. Removing it is mechaber. It's considered to be extinguishing it. So therefore, we're geyser that he shouldn't do that because he might come to take it away from there. And va'afil shel cheres, and even if the reservoir is earthenware, where it's mias and people don't normally handle it, nevertheless, we still say it's also, we're still geyser. But Rabbi Yehuda matir, and Rabbi Yehuda says it's mutter. Now over here, a person's not accustomed to restraining himself, and one would say, well, normally he would take away the oil. It should be also, but Rabbi Yehuda is matir. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yehuda is matir. So isn't that a steer to what we're saying? The more answers, Hasam mishum chum b'deshabbos mivdel bedili. Over there, that's different. That's an exception. That because of the chumrah of Shabbos, people are accustomed to restraining themselves. Shabbos is different. Shabbos is chumrah, meaning, again, generally speaking, would be geyser. But Rabbi Yehuda says if a person is accustomed to separating himself and restraining himself, we're not geyser. Now, even in a place where a person is not accustomed to restraining himself, rather, but if it's Shabbos, it's Chomer, so we're not geyser according to Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda said. The Chom say that no, even by Shabbos we are geyser. But Rami the Shabbos is Shabbos. I'll ask you a steer in Hilchos Shabbos itself. The Sanya Chevel Delish and Nifsak. If you have a rope of a pail that snapped, Lo Yeh Kosh, you can't make a knot. On Shabbos you can't make a knot. A kesher shel kayom, a permanent knot, is one of the Avos Malachos. You can't make a knot to tie it together. It's a malacha. What you do is, rather, you make a bow. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, don't make a bow. What you do is you take the two ends of the rope that tore, and you put it together, and then you wrap it over, and that holds it together. You wrap it over with a hollow belt or a garter belt. But you can't make a bow. So you see over here, apparently, that Rabbi Yehuda is geyser, and we say that if you make a bow, so this is Gemara's assumption, is that Rabbi Yehuda l'choira is geyser, that if you make a bow, you might come to make a kesher. Even though it's Hilchos Shabbos, he's geyser. And the Chacham say that you could make a bow, and we're not geyser. So it seems to be a kasha. So Rabbi Yehuda says, don't make a bow. Kasha the Rabbi Yehuda, as a kasha, the Rabbi Yehuda, kasha the Rabbanan, the Rabbanan. The Gemara answers, the Rabbanan like kasha. No, the Rabbanan, it's not a kasha. Now, even though we said before by the Shemen, they are geyser, over there they're geyser. Why? Because Shemen Mechel, because it's talking about oil. Now, normally he uses oil for his food, and normally this is oil, and therefore he will geyser because the oil will be now interchanged with other oil. Therefore we say in that case, you take the oil from the lamp, and therefore you might take it for your food, and therefore they are a geyser. There's nothing to say that this is different. So since he uses oil for his food, he might therefore come to take the oil from the lamp or from the eggshell and use it for his food, or geyser. But over here, what are we allowing you to do? We're not allowing you to make a kesher. We're allowing you to make a bow. A bow is something different than a kesher. It's not going to be interchanged. Just because we allow you to make a bow doesn't mean that a person will come and think to say that he can make a knot. And therefore, they're not interchangeable, so therefore there's no basis of exera. The Rabbi Yehuda like kasha, it's also not a kasha. Time the Rabbi Yehuda la mishum de gazer aniva to kshira, it's not because he's geyser aniva to kshira. Really, he would say, like we said before, that mishum chomer de Shabbos, we don't have to be geyser, we're not geyser. So why does he say over here you can't make a bow? It's not because he's geyser el mishum de kasavra aniva gufa kshira, because he holds not also exera. He holds a bow is also aser. That's also like making a knot, and therefore just included in the malach of kshira. Just like it's also to make a knot, it's also to make a bow, but it's not exer. It itself is part and parcel of the malach of kshira. The Rabbanan will ask another steer, and the Rabbanan are the Rabbanan, because it's not we learned in the Mishnah Shabbos Kashim Glib Piskayim. We can tie to a pail on the top of a well, we can tie it with a garter and make a knot of a loy bechevel, but not with a rope. So why can we allow you to use a garter? Because even though you're making a knot, it won't be a kesher kayama. You don't leave it there. You're not going to leave the garter on a pail. So therefore, it's not going to be permanent. A kesher, the malacha, is a kesher kayama. This is not going to be left over there. So therefore, it's a mutter. But you can't use a rope, because a rope, you'll tie it, it's a kesher shel kayama, you'll leave it there. Rabbi Yehuda mater. Rabbi Yehuda says it's mutter even with a rope. So Gemara now explains it. What rope are we talking about over here? If you mean a regular rope, if it's an ordinary rope, Rabbi Yehuda mater. Rabbi Yehuda says it's mutter with a rope. How can that be? Kesher shel kayamu devare osil betula. It's a regular rope. A regular rope is used for a pail that you tie to a well. So it's going to be left there. That's a kesher shel kayama. How could Rabbi Yehuda say it's mutter? So it can't be the case. Elapshita de gardi. We're not talking about a regular rope. We're talking must be a weaver's rope, a rope that the person who weaves uses, and that's not going to be left on the pail. It's not going to be left on the well. That's a valuable rope that's used for the weaving. So he's only putting there temporarily, and he's not going to leave it there. So it's not a kesher shekama. Because the Rabbanan chevel de gardi ato chevel de alma, and the Rabbanan were geyser, the weaver's rope onto a chevel de alma on concern of a regular rope. Now before they were saying the aniva, they were not geyser making the bow onto a regular rope, onto a regular kesher rather, and over here we say that they're geyser using a weaver's rope onto a chevel de alma. More answers in yes. That's not a stira. Chevel bechevel mechel. One rope, another rope, that can be interchanged. If you allow them to use a chevel de gardi, you might use a regular rope, and that would be a kesher kayama. So therefore, they're geyser. Aniva b'kshira loy mechelfa, but aniva b'kshira, a bow with a knot, will not be confused. They're clearly different, so they're not geyser. Meaning that, in general terms, we would be geyser if a person might come to eat from something. If we allow him to handle it, he might come to eat from it. But there are overriding concerns. And when we say we're not geyser. Now, according to Rav Yehuda, we say we would be geyser, but in a case, for instance, where a chodesh, where it's b'dila minei, and he's accustomed to keeping away from him, we're not geyser. Now, in cases of Shabbos, we're not geyser because of the chumrah of Shabbos, and that's a special chumrah of Shabbos. Rabbi Yehuda says an aniva is not a question of gzeira. An aniva is a kesher, and he answers a bow not because of gzeira, because it is a kesher. The Rabbanan say you do the bedika on chametz even, you do bedikas chametz even after Shas Yisr. Why are they not concerned that he might come to eat it by Chodesh? They are concerned that he might come to eat it. Here we say by Chametz, since his whole purpose is to search for the Chametz and destroy it, we're not concerned over here. Now on Shabbos, they don't agree with Rav Yehuda that because of the Chomer of Shabbos, the person won't come to do the Yisr, and they are geyser on Shabbos. However, they hold that a niva, a bow, is not a kesher. They hold a bow is not a kesher, and it's clearly different from a knot, so therefore a bow is mutter. But they would be geyser on Shabbos, and even though Shabbos is chomer, there still is a makom to be geyser. But they hold that an aniva, bow, is clearly different. So where it's clearly different, there's no reason to be geyser.